7 p.m. St. Mary's Baptist Church, Jackson County. The sanctuary glowed warm under yellow lights, hymns rising in steady waves. The choir's voices carried over the wood beams, echoing smooth and layered. Children's laughter slipped between the notes, sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. The smell of fried chicken lingered from the potluck, mixed with candle wax and cologne. Fans overhead rattled as they pushed the humid air downward. The front doors shook once, loud enough to still the voices. Conversations cut mid-sentence. A cough echoed, a baby whimpered. Then the doors burst open. Hinges cracked, splinters flew across the entry floor. 5 men stormed through, faces hidden in cloth, rifles raised, boots striking tile hard and fast. Their movement was sharp, rehearsed. The first shot rang out louder than the hymn had been. The report rattled the rafters. Panic erupted. Screams broke the silence. People dropped low against the pews. Bullets tore through wood. Splinters cut faces and arms. Hymnals burst apart, pages scattering. The stained glass window above the altar fractured. Blue and red shards fell over the choir stand like sharp rain. The air filled with gunpowder, metallic and choking. Smoke drifted through the pews, rolling low and heavy. A woman cried out for her son. Another shouted, "Get down!" But the gunfire drowned her words. A rifle swept left. The organist dove under the bench as rounds splintered the wood. Candles tipped, wax pooling hot across the carpet. An angel figure in glass shattered against the pulpit steps. Boots pounded forward, glass crunching beneath them. "Stay down!" One gunman barked, voice muffled through cloth. His command was sharp, cold, and followed by another burst. A teenage boy clutched his sister's hand. His whisper carried just far enough. "Mama, I'm scared." A round ripped through the pew, grazing his arm, spraying blood onto the hymnal. His sister screamed. A rifle turned toward her sound. One more crack and silence followed from her side. At 7:06 p.m. a 911 call hit dispatch. Female voice, panicked, shouted, "They're shooting inside St. Mary's, people down." Operator logged multiple gunshots in progress. Units dispatched, lights and sirens en route. Inside, the Reverend stepped forward from the pulpit, his hands raised high, his voice loud enough to ride above the chaos. "Stop this. This is God's house." The nearest rifle swung toward him. A shot struck the cross behind, wood exploding into shards that rained over his shoulders. He dropped to his knees, coughing in smoke. A woman crawled across the aisle, dragging a bleeding leg. She whispered, "Please don't kill me," as she reached for a crying child. A rifle butt slammed into her shoulder. She hit the floor flat. Her cry cut short. By 7:09 p.m., clips emptied. Metallic snaps of reloads echoed. Then more bursts shook the sanctuary. Pews collapsed under fire. Children screamed into the smoke. The fans churned the haze into ragged swirls. Floors slicked red beneath boots. Pinned under a pew, a man raised his head. His voice cracked, broken with terror. "God help us." The final shot rang, blasting splinters across the aisle. His voice ended in silence. The shooters turned as one. Boots thudded down the center aisle. Rifles slung, barrels smoking. Their exit was fast, cold, and without a word. The church fell into ruin. Broken glass coated the pews. Candles guttered in shallow wax. Bullet casings lay scattered in the aisles, glinting under fluorescent light. At 7:12 p.m., the northwest corner camera still blinked red. Its lens scanned the wreckage. Frames rolled steady, capturing smoke, shattered wood, blood on hymnals. And there in the center aisle, an object lay abandoned. A baseball cap dropped in the rush. Across the front, stitched in bold thread, the insignia of a local supremacist crew glared bright under the broken light. St. Mary's Baptist Church stood on the corner of Ashland Avenue, white paint peeling, but the doors polished weakly until they shone under the street lamps. On Sundays, families filled the small parking lot with pickup trucks and sedans, the sound of tires crunching gravel mixing with children's voices. The building was more than a sanctuary. It was the center of a neighborhood that lived through the week with its rhythm. The choir practiced on Tuesdays. Wednesday nights were prayer meetings. Saturdays, mothers gathered in the kitchen, baking sweet bread and pies, the smell drifting into the hall. Reverend Charles Henry kept the keys in his pocket. He was 62, his back stiff from service years in the army, but his voice still carried across the pews. He lived in a small house behind the church with 3 children who were not his by blood but by duty. Their parents gone, they followed him to choir practice and sat on the steps while he polished sermons. Witnesses described him as steady, never hurried, always wearing a pressed shirt with sleeves rolled even when heat clung heavy. Inside the sanctuary, wax from Sunday candles left faint scents on the wood. Hymnals carried penciled notes from generations before. In the basement, folding chairs stood in neat rows, ready for meetings and potlucks. The community knew the building as a second home. Children practiced gospel songs until their voices cracked with laughter. Teenagers rehearsed plays for Easter. Old men smoked on the back steps after service, passing stories of work shifts and lost friends. But outside, marks appeared that did not belong. In June, black spray paint scrawled across the back wall read, "Go home." A week later, the signpost at the intersection bore fresh bullet holes, metal bent and scarred. Residents reported the damage. Patrol officers looked, shook their heads, and logged it as mischief. "Just kids playing," one officer said on record. No patrols increased. No cameras were added. By mid-July, more graffiti spread. White letters stretched across the dumpster, slurs directed at the congregation. Tires were slashed in the lot during choir practice. Glass bottles smashed near the steps. Mothers hurried their children inside before nightfall. The church locked its doors earlier, but the sound of laughter still carried through the walls. They refused to cancel service. At 6 p.m. on a Wednesday, a woman preparing bread for the prayer group noticed a truck idling near the alley. Witnesses saw 2 men leaning against the hood, watching the church doors. When asked what they were doing, one muttered, "Just looking," before the truck rolled away. The license plate was reported. No follow-up came. Reverend Henry never spoke of fear. He still opened the doors each morning at 7 a.m., still swept the steps before sunrise. Yet those close to him noticed small changes. He checked locks twice. He installed new light bulbs around the exterior. At choir practice, he stood near the back doors until everyone had left. He still led songs with the same command, but his eyes swept the windows more often. On Sunday evenings, candles filled the sanctuary with the smell of lavender and smoke. Children clapped to the rhythm of the gospel, their voices bright against the worn walls. In those moments, the church seemed untouchable, a place sealed from the street outside. The choir swayed, the organ rolled deep notes, and the congregation clapped in unison. To anyone watching from the steps, it was a picture of safety. But signs of escalation were documented. Security cameras on a grocery across the street captured figures loitering near the church fence at 11 p.m. one night. The footage, time-stamped and clear, showed them carving into the wooden post with a knife. By morning, the words "Last Warning" were etched across the fence. Photographs were taken, complaints filed. Nothing changed. At 8 a.m. one weekday, the mail arrived at the church office. A secretary sorting envelopes found one without a return address. The paper inside was short, typed, each word in bold block letters. It read, "Sunday will be your last hymn." She handed it to Reverend Henry without a word. He folded it once, slid it into his Bible, and locked his office door. The envelope remained in church custody. Its paper was bagged later as evidence. The threat had been real, and it had been ignored. 7:03 p.m. Sunday. The first pickup truck rolled slow down Ashland Avenue, its headlights washing across the front of St. Mary's Baptist. Witnesses later recalled 2 vehicles, both dark, both lifted high on off-road tires. The engines idled rough, their exhaust clouded white in the humid night air. Neighbors standing on porches heard the doors slam open, heavy boots striking pavement. 5 men stepped out, faces wrapped in white cloth, rifles pulled tight to their chests. The front doors of the church were already shut. Inside, the choir swayed to gospel, candles flickered, and families sat shoulder to shoulder. Outside, one man raised his arm. A single shout cut through the air, "White country forever." The words carried across the street, caught by a cell phone microphone from a bystander crouched in the shadows. Then the men charged forward. 7:04 p.m. Doors burst wide. Shots cracked sharp and fast. Glass shattered in waves. Wooden pews splintered, bodies dropped flat to the floor. A woman screamed as rounds tore through the left aisle. The organ's deep note cut off mid-chord. Candles fell, dripping wax across the altar cloth. The smell of gunpowder filled the sanctuary, thick and metallic, choking throats and burning eyes. 4 lives ended in the first 2 minutes. Reverend Henry, struck once in the chest, collapsed against the pulpit. A choir member, teenage, fell beside the organ, her voice silenced mid-song. A mother shielding her child never rose. Another man pinned near the front doors went down as he tried to push others outside. 11 more were hit, some bleeding across the aisles, some crawling, leaving smears on the polished floor. By 7:06 p.m., dispatchers logged multiple 911 calls. One woman's voice shook. "Shots inside St. Mary's, people screaming, please hurry." A man shouted over the line, "It's a massacre, get here now." The logs confirmed officers were routed. Sirens sounded in the distance. Inside, the chaos deepened. Witnesses later described the flashes of light. Headlights from the pickups outside shone through broken windows, illuminating smoke drifting across the sanctuary. Silhouettes of the gunmen moved like shadows through the haze. Boots crunched over glass. Muffled laughter was heard between bursts of fire. At least 2 attackers reloaded on sight, the metallic snap echoing above the cries. Children clung to mothers, pressed tight beneath pews. Men shouted to stay down. The words drowned in the next volley. Broken hymnals scattered across the floor. Pages lifted in the rush of air with each shot. A stained glass panel exploded, its shards raining onto the choir loft. By 7:10 p.m., the shooters retreated. They moved back through the doors, rifles smoking, boots pounding fast down the steps. Engines roared as the trucks pulled away, tires spitting gravel onto the street. The church was left in silence, broken only by moans, prayers, and the distant rise of sirens closing in. At 7:13 p.m., first units arrived. Dashcam video captured the scene, congregation members stumbling out, clothes torn, blood-staining sleeves and dresses. Officers rushed inside with flashlights raised, beams cutting through smoke. The pews were shredded. The altar cloth burned slow from a toppled candle. The cross lay broken in splinters across the pulpit. 4 bodies covered the front steps. 11 more were carried out, their cries recorded on body cams. The smell of blood and powder lingered heavy. Glass cut into shoes and uniforms. Radios crackled with urgent reports. 4 down, multiple injured. EMS priority, all units respond. Medics worked under flashing lights. Stretchers rolled through the parking lot. Mothers wept, clutching children wrapped in gauze. Reporters gathered at the tape within the hour. By 9 p.m., headlines appeared online. Gang violence erupts in church shooting. Local stations echoed the phrase. Anchors read scripts that avoided words like hate crime. The first official statement called it a tragic outbreak of youth violence. Photographs showed stained glass, shattered and charred, but no mention of slogans shouted outside. Witness accounts told otherwise. A man on Ashland Avenue swore he heard "White country forever." A woman living across the street claimed she saw masks, rifles, and 2 trucks. Her statement was filed, time-stamped at 9:32 p.m. It did not appear in the morning paper. At 11 p.m., footage surfaced. A survivor inside had kept their phone recording under a pew. The video ran 4 minutes. Shaky, blurred by smoke, but the sound was clear. Gunfire echoed, screams layered, and amid the haze, one face slipped free of cloth for a fraction of a second. The camera caught his jawline, his eyes, and his smirk as he turned toward the exit. The clip froze on that frame, uploaded to social media, spreading before dawn. By 2 a.m., the comments identified him. The name repeated across threads, matched against photographs on public pages. The face in the video belonged to Daniel Price Jr., 21, son of the county sheriff. The uniform he sometimes wore in public photos matched the build, the stance, the haircut visible under the white cloth. The recording ended as the trucks roared away, engines drowning the final screams. The survivor's phone was recovered from beneath the shattered pew. The file remained intact. Its last frame showed smoke, blood-stained floorboards, and the uncovered face of a man who should not have been there at all. 8 a.m. Courthouse steps, Jackson County. The flag hung still above the brick facade, cameras lined the entrance, and a crowd pressed tight against barricades. Family members of the 4 killed at St. Mary's stood in the front row, holding photographs. Their voices carried over the chants, calling for charges against the men captured on cell phone video. Inside, the district attorney stepped to the podium. His statement was brief. The investigation has not produced sufficient evidence to proceed with indictments at this time. Reporters shouted questions. What about the video? What about the survivor's recording? The DA adjusted his tie, repeated the phrase insufficient evidence, and walked away under escort. Court transcripts later confirmed the evidence log. The original phone video had been submitted to police custody at 3 a.m. the night of the shooting. By the time the court requested it, the file was missing. A detective testified that the drive containing the clip had been misplaced during transfer. No backup copy was produced. By 10 a.m., news vans broadcast live. Crowds outside the courthouse chanted, "Justice for St. Mary's." But by evening, the coverage shifted. Local stations aired shortened segments, cutting away before showing the protest signs. The following day, one network dropped the story entirely. Families of the victims reported harassment. At 11 p.m. one night, the Henry household phone rang. A male voice, distorted, whispered, "You're next." Another call came 2 nights later to a widow of one of the victims. The words were clearer. "Shut your mouth or we shut it for you." Police logs showed both calls were reported. No suspects were pursued. On Main Street, businesses displayed candles and wreaths for the victims. The following morning, 2 storefronts were vandalized. Windows shattered. Spray paint across the glass. "Stop lying." The shopkeepers filed complaints. Patrol cars drove by, but no arrests followed. A press conference 3 weeks after the shooting, Sheriff Daniel Price stood in uniform. Cameras clicked as he leaned into the microphone. "These were young men. They made mistakes. This was just boys being boys." Gasps rose from the crowd. A man in the back shouted, "They killed our families." The sheriff looked down, adjusted his badge, and walked off stage without another word. Body cam footage from the night of the shooting surfaced in fragments. It showed stretchers rolling out of the sanctuary, blood smeared across uniforms, candles still flickering on broken pews. The footage confirmed the death toll: 4 dead, 11 wounded. Yet the official report filed by the sheriff's office described the attack as an altercation between rival groups. The words hate crime were not used. By the second month, protests expanded. Hundreds gathered weekly outside the courthouse. They carried photographs of the dead, candles lit even in daylight. Police formed lines with riot shields. Helicopters circled overhead. Yet television broadcasts captured only a fraction. Segments ran under neutral titles. Community demonstrations continue. The footage showed candles, not confrontations. Inside the church basement, survivors organized. They distributed flyers, recounted their testimony, and preserved copies of the cell phone video that still circulated online. One woman said into a handheld recorder, "I saw his face. I know who he is." She described the sheriff's son, Daniel Price Jr., standing with a rifle in the aisle. The tape was submitted as sworn testimony. It was not admitted in court. Witnesses to intimidation grew. Cars idled outside victim families' homes late at night. Tires were slashed on 3 separate vehicles belonging to survivors. Doors were kicked once and left dented. Reports were filed. The sheriff's office listed them as possible pranks. At 7 p.m., one of the key witnesses prepared to testify in a reopened hearing. His name was entered into the docket. He had described the shooter's truck and claimed to have followed its path the night of the attack. That evening, he failed to appear. The following morning at 6 a.m., state police received a call from a fisherman along the Red River. He reported an abandoned vehicle parked near the embankment. Patrol units arrived by 6:30 a.m. The car was identified as belonging to the missing witness. Its driver's door stood open, keys still in ignition. Headlights burned until the battery drained. The front seat was empty. Officers combed the shoreline with flashlights. Mud showed boot prints leading down to the water, then nothing further. Divers entered at 9 a.m., scanning the current. No bodies surfaced. No belongings were found beyond the car. The scene was taped off. The case file listed the man as missing, presumed drowned. The protests outside the courthouse grew louder that night. Candles lit the street again, held high by families who knew one of their own had vanished. Photographs of the abandoned car circulated online. The image of the open door, headlights dimmed, became another unanswered question. The funerals began at 10 a.m. on a humid Saturday. St. Mary's Baptist was boarded in places, its broken glass covered with plywood, but the pews were filled. Black cloth draped the pulpit. 4 caskets lined the front, each surrounded by flowers. Cameras flashed as families carried framed photographs. Outside, police cars idled along the curb. Reporters filmed in silence. Witness accounts described rows of mourners stretching down Ashland Avenue. Gospel hymns carried through open windows and the steady sound of crying. Among the crowd was Marcus Reed, age 32, recently returned from Iraq. He wore his uniform jacket despite the heat. Observers noted his presence at each casket, standing rigid, saluting once and bowing his head. His sister Layla had been among the 4 killed, a choir member shot near the organ. Marcus stayed behind after the service. Surveillance footage from the church lot showed him entering the family home across the street that evening, carrying a duffel bag. 2 days later, Marcus entered Layla's old office. She had worked with community groups tracking extremist activity in the county. On her desk sat a laptop powered but unused for months. At 7 p.m., the screen glowed with a folder marked Outreach. Inside, investigators later confirmed, was a file labeled Watch List. It contained names, addresses, and notes connected to a local supremacist organization. Layla had compiled it through public records, flyers, and testimonies. The file included at least 9 names. Neighbors reported Marcus spent long nights in the house that week. At 2 a.m., the glow of a desk lamp was visible through the window. One delivery driver recalled seeing papers taped across the wall and a large map spread on the table. When investigators entered later, they described red cords strung between photographs, addresses pinned, and handwritten notes beneath each. A roll of duct tape, black gloves, and a lockbox were found on the floor. By Wednesday evening, graffiti appeared on the walls of a bar frequented by the supremacist group. In red spray paint, block letters read, "We remember St. Mary's." Security footage showed a figure in a hooded jacket, face obscured, walking away at 11 p.m. Police logs noted the vandalism as possible retaliation. On Friday, a pickup truck belonging to one of the named men was found in a parking lot with its tires slashed. Inside, the dashboard was carved with the words, "You're next." The driver reported it to deputies. No suspects were arrested. Marcus's movements continued to draw notice. Store cameras recorded him purchasing rope, fuel cans, and spray paint. Hardware receipts were later entered into evidence. One witness saw him at 1 a.m. parked near a diner where members of the supremacist crew often met. He remained in his car for over an hour, headlights off, before driving away. At the Reed home, the dining table became the command point. Papers marked with addresses lay stacked. A folded county map showed circles drawn in black ink. Red string-tied thumbtacks from one location to another. A notepad listed times of movement, vehicle descriptions, and dates. On the back of one page, written in bold strokes, was a single phrase, Every name will fall. Witnesses noticed more graffiti across town. On the courthouse wall appeared the words, "No justice, no peace." On the door of the sheriff's office, the phrase, "St. Mary's Lives," was found in red paint at dawn. Reports of the tags were logged, but no arrests followed. At 9 p.m. on a Sunday night, Marcus was spotted near a wooded stretch of Route 9. A passing driver saw his car pulled onto the shoulder. Headlights were off. The driver noted a second vehicle nearby, a dark pickup, door ajar. At 7 a.m. the next morning, hunters entering the forest found a man hanging from a tree. The rope dug deep into his neck. His wrists were tied behind him. Around his throat was wrapped a strip of cloth torn from a church banner. Sheriff's deputies arrived by 7:30 a.m. Photographs confirmed the scene. The man was identified as one of the names on Layla's list. His truck sat nearby, keys still in the ignition. The body swayed in the breeze. Birds scattered from the noise of radios crackling. Deputies cut him down at 8:12 a.m., laying the body flat on a tarp. Reporters reached the site by midday. Footage showed the tree trunk scarred by rope marks, the ground disturbed with heavy boot prints. The cloth remained as evidence, its fibers clearly traced to fabric taken from the church. Cameras zoomed close as deputies loaded the body into a van. No suspects were named. The county coroner listed cause of death as hanging. The official statement called it an apparent suicide under investigation. Yet photographs leaked online told a different story. The knots were bound behind the back, the strip of church cloth tied deliberately. By evening, crowds gathered again outside St. Mary's. Candles lit the steps, smoke rising against the plywood boards still covering broken windows. Families whispered prayers. A single question spread through the crowd: who had left the body hanging, wrapped in the memory of the church? The answer was not written, but the warning was clear. One name on the list was gone. 8 remained. At 2 a.m. on a back road outside Jackson County, flames lit the trees. A truck burned hot, fire curling from its hood and cab. The smell of gasoline spread across the woods. Deputies arrived by 2:27 a.m., headlights cutting through smoke. The metal shell glowed red. Inside, responders found a body slumped across the seat, skin charred, clothing fused to metal. License plate confirmed it belonged to a known member of the local supremacist crew. Fire investigators ruled the blaze suspicious. No accelerant cans were recovered, but black scorch marks on the ground traced an even line around the tires. By morning, news carried the headline, "Pickup Fire Claims Life of Local Man." The segment ran 2 minutes, tagged as a tragic accident. Commentators repeated the phrase. On social media, images told a different story. Close shots of the truck showed rope binding still clutched in the victim's hand. 3 days later, at 6:15 a.m., an explosion rocked a neighborhood near Lincoln Street. Witnesses described a boom that shook windows. A single-story home collapsed in flames. Fire crews pulled one man from the wreckage. He was identified as another name from Layla Reed's list. Gas line failure was cited on the evening news, yet photographs of the site showed valves twisted shut, pipes deliberately loosened. The report filed at 7:03 a.m. noted the smell of fuel concentrated in one room, not throughout the house. By 9 a.m., crowds gathered near the burned foundation. Police tape stretched across fences. Neighbors whispered about timing, about targets, but official language remained. "String of misfortune," the anchor said at 6 p.m. The words ran across the bottom of the screen, replacing older headlines about St. Mary's. While streets carried smoke and sirens, inside the rebuilt basement of the church, candles burned steady. Women lit them each night, wax dripping onto trays lined in foil. Their prayers rose soft, mixed with the low hum of gospel from a battery-powered speaker. Children cut out paper angels with safety scissors, taping them across the wall. Each bore a name of the dead. The wall grew crowded. White wings overlapped, a mural of silence and memory. By late August, Marcus was not alone. Records show meetings at a rented warehouse near the rail line. Parking lot cameras caught familiar faces entering late at night. Some were black veterans, men who had served in Afghanistan and returned with scars. Others were white locals once beaten or chased by the same supremacist group now under attack. They came with duffel bags, with tools wrapped in rags, with rifles stored in trunk beds. At 11 p.m. one Friday, a group of 6 moved inside the warehouse. Neighbors heard drills, hammering, and the steady thump of boots on concrete. Windows were covered in black plastic. No one entered during the day. Inside, maps were spread across folding tables. Photographs of vehicles, license plates, and homes lined corkboards. Red markers circled key addresses. Beneath one board sat boxes of spray paint, rolls of wire, and canisters labeled fuel mix. The graffiti continued. On the overpass above Route 4, letters 6 feet high spelled out, "St. Mary's Lives." On the courthouse steps, chalk marks read, "You forgot us." The sheriff's office painted over the signs by morning, but photographs spread online by night. Deputy logs at 2 a.m. one morning reported a convoy of 3 cars circling the sheriff's precinct, headlights off, moving slow. Security cameras caught only shadows across the lot. No arrests were made. One evening, Marcus and his crew stood in the basement of the church. Candles flickered against their faces. Voices low, they spoke few words. "It's time," one said. Another replied, "No more waiting." Their hands pressed flat against the table where the county precinct map lay open. Strings marked the building where evidence of the St. Mary's attack had once been stored, then misplaced. By September 10, the pattern of violence had left 2 more men dead. One burned, one blasted from his home. The press framed it as coincidence. The community lit more candles. Inside the warehouse, the group packed bags with black clothing, masks, and taped magazines. Rifles were wrapped in blankets, carried to trunks. A single phrase was written across the whiteboard, "Precinct next." That night, storm clouds pressed low over Jackson County. Rain spattered the asphalt outside the warehouse doors. Boots thudded as the crew loaded gear into their vehicles. Engines revved once, then cut. They stood silent, listening to the rain. Marcus spread the precinct map flat, stabbed his finger at the red circle drawn around the sheriff's office, and said only 4 words. "Bring the war there." The decision was set. Their next target was not a house or a truck. It was the heart of law enforcement, the place where files had vanished and testimony had been buried. The precinct itself stood in their sights. 10 p.m., rain hammered the streets of Jackson County. Lightning cracked above the courthouse square. Sirens wailed distant, and the precinct windows glowed pale in the storm. Security cameras caught shadows moving across the lot. At 10:07 p.m., the first flash came. Smoke burst from the rear entrance as a canister rolled across the floor. The feed blurred in gray haze. By the time the alarm sounded, the front doors were already breached. Witnesses across the street described black-clad figures sprinting through the rain, boots slapping pavement, shotguns raised. A transformer sparked at 10:11 p.m., plunging half the block into darkness. Flashlights cut across walls inside the precinct. Radios scrambled with static. "We've lost power on the east wing." The smell of smoke rolled through hallways, thick, acrid, burning lungs. By 10:15 p.m., the crew controlled the main corridor. Bodycam footage from one responding officer showed muzzle flashes flaring bright against the storm-lit windows. Gunfire echoed, wood splintered, glass shattered. The crew moved with precision, covering each corner, advancing toward the records room. Shouts rang out over the chaos. "Get down! Move!" The echoes drowned beneath the steady blast of shotguns. In the basement, the records vault stood locked. Surveillance camera inside caught sparks as bolt cutters chewed the chain. The door swung wide at 10:22 p.m. Marcus Reed stepped in first, rain still dripping from his jacket, face hidden under a mask. Behind him, stacks of files lined the shelves, boxes marked with years and case numbers. At the far wall, a figure waited. Daniel Price Jr. stood with a rifle across his chest, the sheriff's son. his face visible under the fluorescent hum, eyes locked on Marcus. For a moment the smoke hung still between them, then Marcus's voice cut sharp. "You killed her in the house of God." Daniel raised the rifle, words flat. "She didn't belong." Marcus advanced, shotgun steady. His reply came low, "Neither do you." The first shots tore through the room. Bullets slammed into file boxes, paper bursting into confetti, fluttering down like snow. The cross that hung above the shelves cracked loose as rounds struck the wall. It fell to the floor with a heavy thud, one arm snapped, lying across spilled folders. The duel raged in close quarters. Shells clattered on concrete. Sparks lit from ricochets. Smoke thickened until the camera lens blurred white. At 10:29 p.m., a final blast cut the noise. The slug punched through Daniel's chest, carried him back against the shelves and through the falling cross. He slid down, blood smearing the wood as it toppled across him. Silence followed. Only rain against shattered windows, only the hiss of the fire alarm, only the rustle of papers settling on the wet floor. Marcus lowered the shotgun. His crew fanned out, pulling files into bags, scattering more across the ground. Upstairs, officers scrambled in confusion. Radios crackled with fragments. "We're blind here. Need backup now." Gunfire popped from hall to hall, drowned by thunder. A dispatcher's log recorded the moment at 10:35 p.m. Suspects appear inside records division. Chief is unaccounted for. By 10:41 p.m. the answer came. A live feed lit the internet. Cameras inside the precinct had been hijacked. Phones buzzed with alerts. On the stream, Sheriff Daniel Price appeared, his uniform drenched, his face pale. He was on his knees in the hallway, hands raised, mouth open in a plea. His voice trembled through the speakers. "Please stop this." His badge glinted under the broken lights. The image spread fast across networks. Thousands watched as the county's top officer begged under the storm. The feed held steady. The sheriff's words echoed again. "Please don't kill me." And then the stream froze, the frame fixed on his face, mouth open mid-sentence, eyes wide under the fluorescent glare. The picture stayed alive on screens across the country, the storm still raging outside, the precinct in blackout within. 6 a.m. the storm had broken. The streets of Jackson County were washed clean but scarred, puddles reflecting the pale glow of street lamps still humming. The church stood in silhouette at the corner of Ashland Avenue. Its walls were blackened by smoke, boards nailed over shattered windows, but the cross still rose above the roofline. The wood was split, edges charred, yet it remained upright against the morning light. Cameras documented the aftermath. The precinct lot was cordoned off with yellow tape, bullet casings scattered across wet concrete. Windows blown out, doors hanging from twisted hinges. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered weakly over papers soaked in rain that had poured through broken skylights. The records vault stood open, its shelves emptied, files trampled into puddles of ink and blood. Officers moved through the hallways with flashlights, boots crunching glass. The storm had ended, but silence carried heavier than thunder. By 7 a.m., bodies were logged. 2 supremacist members were pulled from the forest edge, rope burns scored across their wrists. Another was found inside the burned frame of his truck. One more lay collapsed near the precinct stairwell, chest split from a shotgun slug. Their names matched those listed on Layla Reed's laptop, the file pulled weeks before from her desk. The list was shrinking, one by one. The town itself held still. Businesses opened late. Few cars passed. At the diner on Main Street, chairs stayed stacked, lights off. The only sound carried from the church where families gathered again. Women lit candles, placing them along the steps, their flames guttering in the wind. Children taped new paper angels over the plywood boards, wings fluttering as rain dripped from the roof. At 8 a.m., federal vehicles rolled into the county square. Dark SUVs parked in a line, agents stepping out in suits, briefcases in hand. A statement was delivered outside the courthouse steps. The St. Mary's case would be reopened under federal supervision. Reporters held microphones steady as the announcement echoed. All prior evidence will be re-examined. The cameras zoomed close on the faces of survivors, their eyes fixed on the agents, unmoving. Across the church wall, new markings appeared. Spray paint, red and fresh against the blackened wood. The words stretched 6 feet high, "Never again, 7/17. Photographs of the graffiti spread through the neighborhood before noon. By evening, the image circulated online, replicated across banners and posters. The date fixed itself in memory, painted into brick and concrete. Inside the sanctuary, the pews were half gone, splintered from gunfire and fire. Yet the altar still stood. Candles ringed it, wax dripping into shallow pools. The cross leaned but held, streaked black from smoke. Families knelt in silence. Their voices whispered names, one by one, until the hall filled with echoes softer than hymns. At 10 a.m., news anchors broadcast footage of the sheriff. His final plea, captured live during the siege, had already been shared millions of times. The frame froze on his knees, hands raised, mouth open in surrender. Across the country, his voice replayed, "Please stop this." The image remained on screens, the badge at his chest glinting under failing light. By noon, the town had no traffic. Sirens were silent. Only the rustle of leaves carried down the streets. The precinct stood hollow, its walls torn, its windows broken. Across its entrance, one phrase had been spray-painted during the night. Black block letters read, "The files are ours." The day closed with candlelight again. Outside St. Mary's, flames lined the steps, their smoke curling into dusk. Names of the dead were whispered into the air. Photographers captured the final frame. Children standing with their paper angels, women holding candles, the cross still upright against the sky. From that night on, their names were no longer just names. They were warnings carved in fire.